Right. So, hello everybody. So I thought for this presentation, I know we have people who are really deep expert in the room, but we may also have people who are a bit less familiar with the problem. So I really try to take a step back, and also it's some of the discussion I'm presenting today is, in my view, how as a community, as computer scientists, computational biologists, we can try to engage with funders and people outside of our area to explain why the issue of data resources is really fundamental and something that should be also of their interest. And so I hope that we can also have a discussion around that afterwards. So obviously, we know that data has become now really a strategic resource. And this has been recognized at the very highest level. It's been compared to oil, but of course, unlike oil, data can be reused, and this is really a critical distinction. And this is Ursula von der Leyen just a few years back, trying to share this notion that that inside data we can find some hidden treasure, hidden nuggets. And that if we are getting better at organizing and sharing this data, then we can unlock a lot of potential for, something that is also going to have a tangible impact to society. And so if we really think about really the key here, why are we so excited about FAIR? Why are we so excited about the notion of data sharing? Is because we know data is being generated in typically a very specialized context, in the context of a single laboratory. But then if we deposit this data and if we build on top of this data, we generate some knowledge, then it could be interesting beyond just that particular subfield. The subfield, maybe people will know each other personally, they will go to some conference, it will be fine. But if you want to have people outside of a discipline, or even what I would call like the ultimate non-specialist, AI, for that to appreciate this work, we need to organize and link this data. And so this is also why, I don't have the animation synchronized. So we deposit the data, organize the data, and then this data is being reused. I mentioned AI in particular. This is why FAIR has become such an important concept and so widely adopted by funders and institutions and politics, because they see actually we can now demultiply the value of the data that has been generated in all these public investments. And so I like FAIR, that's great, but I think as a conceptualization, perhaps we should think of this as a data democratization effort. And so this is sometimes helpful to kind of cast what is it that we're doing in a kind of a more tangible manner. We want this data to be broadly reusable. Okay. And what do we mean by data here? And so sometimes there's, I think, some confusion. We may have like different approaches. If you look at the more philosophical or like information theory, there's typically this pyramid of knowledge where you start with data as observation, and then it's information, and then knowledge. Some people, they say then there's even wisdom. We heard of wisdom earlier. We consider all that to be data. And I think there's a good reason for that, is that even wisdom has to be encoded at some point. Knowledge has to be encoded. I'm speaking to you now, hopefully transmitting a little bit of knowledge. Well, that's in form of speech. Between computers, it's ontologies. We've talked about code. So we're taking data in a broad sense. If we think we want to share all of this stack across different fields and with machines, we better think seriously about how we want to encode this data. And so again, I'm preaching to the choir here. Sorry about this animation. It's okay. I should be looking at this screen actually. It's completely. No. Yeah, I'm lost now. It's no longer synchronized. Okay. Okay, this is okay. All right. So again, the data is produced in a very specific context. It's in silo. There's relatively little added value, and so our effort here collectively is to clean this data, to organize, to link it, such as it's understandable, interpretable, and reusable by all. The value is multiplied, And also, yes, if you are really worried about trustworthy AI, this is, as I think Alex pointed out really eloquently earlier, really critical. Now, whose job is it to democratize this data? I think this is really the crux of the question. And so far, funders seem to think this is mainly the researchers' job, okay? We're gonna have some data management plans, and they're gonna learn how to verify their data. So the work is done, the paper's ready. I'm really glad to publish my work. Now, how do I, as a researcher, share the associated data? Perhaps I have got some data for which there's a specialized repository. Then that's great. Then this data should be submitted. It should be sent to Guy, to INSDC, to GenBank, and then you're done. Someone else will take care of this data and make sure that it's as valuable as it should be. And we'll decide whether it's outdated, deprecated, etc. It's no longer a concern. Of course, we should require everyone to do that. But how about the rest? Now that's where it gets a little bit more dicey. So, the advice is typically, well, deposit this data in a generalized repository with some ad hoc documentation. Okay, so now we've heard also, you need some sort of skills to do that. But okay, so maybe, we want to verify this data. So what format should I take? What ontologies? How about cross-references? How much is fair enough? I want to get on with my science. It's already a lot of work, even already to deal with the proof of my paper. Now I have to verify also and come up with a new ontology. More importantly, what is the value going to be now of this deposited data to experts in my subfield, but more importantly, to these non-experts, where all of the potential lies? Are they going to scurry the web, Zenodo, find my data documented in a beautiful PDF or Excel sheet, or even OBO file with an ad hoc ontology that is described in some README file, ingest all that, and then, as Ursula von der Leyen was explaining to the public, come up with some new insights? Maybe, but the evidence that we have so far is that AI is typically relying on some fairly well curated data sources, and in fact, that is arguably often the most expensive part of running AI method. And who's going to maintain now this data? Because of course we know it's only valuable if we cross-link it, if we have appropriate taxonomic IDs, which are changing every few months, etc. So actually, if we think about it, sharing data that is non-standard is a project on its own. Something that we've asked now researchers to kind of tack on with maybe, through the DMP, and which indeed requires some distinct skills and motivation. And I would argue it's often a bigger challenge than probably the project itself. We know all the people who are really motivated to share their data, they need years to do that. They need to go to conferences. They need to talk to the users. And it's not something that can be done as an afterthought. I say it's a bit like adopting a puppy. This is maybe a gift, but it's a long-term commitment. Yeah. And so it's probably also a commitment that researchers can only afford to do a few times in their careers, perhaps. And so now if we're thinking about who then should be really helping, and where do we have gaps now in democratizing the data and fair? Well, these are these data resources that we've been talking about, okay? And then, GBC, the Global Biodata Coalition, Elixir, we seem to have gone to that nomenclature of talking about deposition database and knowledge base. In my view, that should cover the entire gamut. The idea, maybe contrary to what was said a bit earlier, that there's not really a very clear distinction between the two, because data is typically not completely raw. And there is, this is a scientific process to basically base some information on existing data and some on new data. But in any case, if we use this terminology, we see actually there's quite a bit of work that is being done to fulfill this vision of democratizing data, of verifying data. And I'm not going to read all that. You can read, but I do want to emphasize, for instance, in the knowledge bases, the effort about aggregating data and synthesizing new knowledge. This is not something that the scientific community should see as like a surveys by people who are on the periphery, that's almost like the highest form of like activity that you could be doing as a researcher. That's the equivalent of writing the textbook or the review article. And this is something that is really important. And sometimes, you know, mistakes are being done, but quite often it is like this neutral person who's going to look for a consensus among like a body of literature, in some case decide to report potentially conflicting information if there is conflicting information, in some cases to call the shot. And so I think Amos gave like a beautiful sense of that activity in his talk 2 3 days ago. So let's talk about funding now. Okay, we know with that in mind and the contribution of the data resources to these efforts, we know that most data resources are extremely poorly funded. Even, you know, the Champions League of data resources, the Global Biodata Coalition, some are losing their funding and they've never been used as much. So why is that? Okay, some of them, they have to rely on project funding. And project funding is not the right instrument for infrastructure. The excellence criteria are different from grants from those for infrastructure. And then that leads to these funding gaps. We've discussed this before. In some cases, it may be possible to put the software in the freezer and wait for better times and then start again, like as Carol was mentioning earlier. But if you have to let go of some experts because you can no longer fund them, it may be extremely difficult to go back. I mean, and again, to speak about the skills, I mean, that if you look at the level of experience that good curators have, is not something that is easy to recruit, and especially when there are fewer and fewer curated resources around. But I would argue, and this is, I think, a kind of a more compelling argument to funders, is that the status quo is actually undermining their own goals. Okay, relying on researchers alone to achieve FAIR is ineffective, is ineffective and wasteful. And as a result, the data and knowledge often remain stuck, and we end up reinventing the wheel. So funders should provide dedicated and competitive schemes for resources for, you know, that are within their remit. We understand it may be very difficult for funders to support resources that are outside their country or research topic, but within their remit, there are typically also resources. Now, there is some criticism to this vision, and so I have a few that I would like to go through. So the first point, and we've heard it already this morning, funding data resources is expensive. Okay, well, it is expensive, but we have to look at the cost benefits. I mean, expensive in relation to what? Buildings is expensive. Coming to conferences, registering to ISMB is expensive. Publishing open access is expensive, but what's the value? And so, I mean, these are just like two references, I think, that are really highlighting the fact, actually, the cost is not that big in relationship with publishing, certainly in relationship with coming up with the work in the first place. And in fact, there's some good argument that probably around 1% of research funding worldwide would be more than enough to cover the current needs of the core data resources. Sorry, lost. Okay, so criticism number two. So funding resources is outside the research funders' remit. We hear this a lot. Okay, this is infrastructure. We only want to focus on bottom-up research. Well, I think there are three reasons why that's misguided, and they should recognize data resources as core to their mission. Number one, you know, they've themselves said that they want to do FAIR. Okay, and cost them also, because they are paying for that, of course, because researchers then also need to spend some time doing the part that is FAIR. We believe in division of labor, and for all the reasons that we mentioned earlier, we think it would be more effective and efficient to have a partnership between the researchers and the data resources. But more fundamentally, resources at the heart of modern research. So here are three really important jobs that they are doing. I already mentioned the synthesis in the middle as part of the knowledge production. but it's also a critical enabler of new research. This has been pointed out before. When you have data-intensive research and AI, where do you get the data from? Again, and then for knowledge dissemination. I mean, we spend so much money on publications, and we're still lucky, actually, that with open access, we can at least glean some information on an ad hoc basis. If you want to mine this data, though, even with open access, you're often in trouble, even like beyond like even just the technical hurdle of parsing some PDF. You may have some legal impediment. And so actually, it's kind of crazy if you think about it. We spend so much money on research, on producing knowledge and data, and we're just so bad at then disseminating it. And we have some database and knowledge base that have like motivated staff that have already shown an amazing ability to do so, and these people are outside of the funding remit. And so, yeah, this is rather surprising. And then there's a third reason. There's a third reason, and I think maybe you can also bring this up to your friends at funding agency. And the third reason is that I think, you may have, I think we have this trend in Europe, but also across the world, is that researchers realize that, good science is more than just publishing papers, in top high impact journals. Actually, it is a bit broader than that. And if we want to recognize the true impact of research, we need to think a little bit beyond just a contribution as a paper. So maybe some of you have heard of COARA. Who has heard of COARA in the room? Okay, this is an idea of recognizing contribution just beyond just the paper. And so they are signing this declaration, and they say this is really important. And so it would be a bit hypocritical if then funding agency then said, well, no, but actually, we preferred only to fund like the paper publishing parts of research, and that part that is outside of our remit. Okay, so I'm almost through. One more criticism. Okay, well, we cannot just keep on funding more and more resources. This one I hear it a lot. Okay, it's really troublesome. You hear it also with infrastructure in general. It's really troublesome. You start funding a resource and then it never stops. Okay, a variant that I hear also some people saying, I'm sure we could make it more efficient. I see like some potential gains there. Well, what is the trick for that? And I was really pleased also to see that in Alex's slide. Life cycle management. Okay, we have a constant budget at SIB. It's been really quite difficult for the last 12 years. We've not had any increase. On the other hand, as Amos was pointing out, we're very fortunate to have a budget to begin with. And so what have we done? Well, we have been very careful about how we spend this money to try to do a reasonable job. And so one thing is that, I'm sorry about I'm doing it completely wrong here, but it's okay. So that was a criticism. So the SIB resource life cycle, you can see we do not fund resources that are just starting off. Great ideas for resources, that is, of course, not even like entertained. And then it is like a competitive process and very difficult choices are made, but it's also understood that a resource will typically not last 3 or 4 years like a grant. And then it's a difficult choice that is done by our scientific advisory board, and they really want to recognize the enormous work that is done by the members of our community that are serving on the board to then make this difficult choice. And then if we look at the past few years, the past few cycles, this has led to some new resources being added to the portfolio, some having some minor increases, actually quite a few cuts, in some cases even cuts to like the top performing resources because of this consideration about optimizing an entire portfolio. And some resources sadly were retired, even some that may have been very good, let's say in absolute sense. And this is how you can hold resources accountable with the money that they are spending. And so I do not want to hear from people saying that, well, resources are then, have to be funded forever and then they're going to be wasteful. There are ways to monitor this. Okay. And then finally, and this is a really critical one, and I think this is also at the heart of some of the discussion that are happening, for instance, within the the Biodata Coalition. We'll hear more from Guy. Everyone loves open science also because someone else is footing the bill. Okay. And so then, why should Switzerland pay if most users of these resources are abroad? Okay. This is what the funders are sometimes asking, why should we pay? So I don't know if you have like a good answer to that one. So I think I do. And actually, it is maybe not an unfamiliar argument. It's just that if you're only relying on other people's resources, that undermines the capacity of your own country. And you're really not reaping the economic benefits, the strategic benefit, and the skilled workforce advantage that you have when you are leading in this space. Okay. And actually, this is exactly the same argument that we have to make as for basic science. Why are we funding basic science? We could just read other countries' papers, right? Well, actually, it turns out there are some advantages in developing a productive environment in a country and to have the capacity, to produce research. And the same thing can be done. And we cannot take it for granted, by the way, that countries continue to fund basic science. We have to continue this fight together. And there, our experimentalist friend and many other areas are very happy to join forces. And so, but I think funders of all people, they should be sensitive to that argument. And it's kind of sometimes surprising that they come up with the criticism I mentioned. And I want to say, and I'm almost done, I'm sorry. In addition, data benefits from linking and integration. So it's even more than for some other area, for basic research. Actually, if you're providing the reference, others will be linking to your data. It's a bit like the advantage that the US dollar being the world currency confers to the US to the USA. Others are connecting to, so it's like beneficial. And there are some evidence actually that the countries that invest into data resources benefit disproportionately. And I have two references here, and I don't want to take more time. So if I recap the roles and responsibilities, the researcher can deposit standard data according to field practice, and they might consider once in a blue moon to consider developing some new data resources. But then we need to support data resources and, of course, use AI internally to increase efficiency and have also good collaboration with the researchers. And the funders, I think, is really important that they require the deposition of standard data, but also that they support the data resources through dedicated schemes. Oh, sorry. Okay, I will have been baffling until the end. Yeah. So I'm going to finish here, but just to say that I think funders and countries that want to be at the leading edge, I think they need to understand that the data resources actually could be a strategic priority. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussions.
We'll follow up with questions. We'll have a panel after this, and then we plenty of opportunities to talk.